University campus.
Yes,
Yeah.
you are. Good morning. Good morning. A bit louder. I know. This is the first Knowledge Cafe of the day. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ifat Sharif. I'm the Global Director for Social Protection and Labor Global Practice here at the World Bank. And I'm delighted to host today's first Knowledge Cafe on talent without borders, the job-creating power of global skills partnerships. So I hope today you will enjoy learning about this new solution that we'll be discussing. And the idea of these cafes is really to have not just exchange knowledge with you, but also I have an esteemed set of panelists here with me, but also have you interact with us on questions you may have. And so we make this truly an interactive learning session. So as I said, this cafe is about global talent. It's about how to best deploy it. Now, why should you care? You should care because this important question addresses two current crises that we face. On one hand, there's a job crisis. At the same time, we are faced with a demographic one, too. So what do I mean? About 2 billion workers right now in the developing countries work in a very precarious situation in informal sector with little or no social protection. You have 250 million youth who are not in education, training, or employment. And you fast forward 10 years, there will be 1.2 billion youth entering the workforce in developing countries, facing only 420 million jobs. Not all of them are going to be lucky. On the other hand, you have many high-income and upper-middle-income countries that are aging rapidly and are facing labor shortages. By 2029, just 4 years, we expect 130 million shortage of workers in the world. And so this doesn't have to be a challenge, and I think that's what the cafe today is about. How can we actually translate this challenge into an opportunity and think about how to best deploy talent across borders? And so I'm delighted that today with me to talk about this question, I have with me Dr. Lutfi Siddiqui. He's the Special Envoy for International Affairs for the interim government of Bangladesh. Dr. Siddiqui is also academic by training. He's a visiting professor at LSE. He is also an adjunct professor at the National University of Singapore, teaching risk management and financial systems. So I'm delighted, Dr. Lutfi, for having you with us. Along with Lutfi, we have Naria Santa Lucia, who's a general manager at Microsoft, heavily engaged in looking at digital inclusion, community engagement, and as really leading global strategies at Microsoft on partnerships, expanding digital training, AI skills for underrepresented communities. So thank you, Naria, for joining us. So let's get started. Let me just first give you a sense of what challenge we're looking at. So if you look at this first slide, what do we have here? What you really see is this is a projection of if we used a benchmark of a country, an economy needing 2.5 workers per elderly person to maintain basic social security system balanced, you see that by 2050, you're looking at a total of 750 million workers that will still be needed in high-income and upper middle-income countries. Now, what do I mean by that? This is after adding to the workforce in these countries an increase in older workers, increase in female labor force participation, some level of overseas workers. Despite adding all of that, we still see the gap to be as large as 750 million. And when you look at the countries that will face these shortages, this includes China, this includes Mexico, this includes Turkey. But when you look at the green side, the left-hand side of the graph, these are the countries where you will actually still see a surplus, meaning you have more workers than your elderly population. And these are the countries like Nigeria, right? And so what you see is potentially, if we get it right, if we are able to deploy talent across borders, we could be filling 600 of that 750 million shortage. So that's the challenge. Now, why do I say there's an opportunity? In the next slide, what we show is that if you get it right, if you manage the movement of talent, development of talent, and move talent where they are needed, you could actually have what we call a triple win. And this is what this graph is trying to show you. And we call these models global skills partnerships, because it is really a partnership between countries that are facing labor surplus with countries that are actually facing that shortage. But you're managing the training, the skilling, and the placement of workers across labor markets, across countries. But you're doing it in a very mindful way. What do I mean by mindful? You're really thinking about filling skilled workers in local economies just as much as international economies, right? And so the idea that you have two tracks when you skill your workers and your youth. You have a home track, which means they have the choice to stay at home if there is a job. And they have the other choice of going abroad if the job is overseas. And so that's the kind of intermediation we're talking about under a global skills partnership. And so we think this is good for the country with the labor shortage, good for the country that has a labor surplus, and good for the worker. So triple win is the fundamental principle behind these solutions. So in the next slide, you give a sense of what that would then mean. So especially drawing Dr. Siddiqui's attention, right? This really means for countries like Bangladesh, who would be willing to send workers because you have a surplus right now, is to think about, what kind of skills development needs that Bangladesh would have to then invest in that is good for the Bangladesh's economy, but the country that may want to recruit workers. So that's about skills development that is demanded. Thinking about the financing that will be needed to train the workers and place, and that needs to be a shared responsibility, right? Because Bangladesh is actually not just helping its own economy, it's helping someone else's economy. And the third is to make sure the movement of workers is being done in an agile, legal, managed way. So it's a very simple model, if you think about it, to a very complex problem that we all think it is complex, but really, at the end of the day, you can simplify it into these three pillars. Now, what would that mean? And that's my last slide, is that you have to take a systems approach, right? To get sure that it's not just 200 workers moving, but it's actually thousands of workers moving, because you just heard the scale. And if you start at the top of the hour, you need to first have a regulatory framework that works on both sides. You need to think about the kind of social protection and employment services that are needed to make sure the workers are moving with the kind of protection that are needed. You need to think of the financing model, as I mentioned, that you have everyone is sharing that responsibility. You need to make sure that the skills and the training that are given is recognized internationally so that there is a job guaranteed and it's recognized. And of course, you need to make sure the systems, the coordination of the demand side and the supply side is intact. So that's kind of where I wanted to stop and open up the conversation with both my colleagues here on stage, but with all of you. And so let me start with Lutfi, maybe. So I just gave you a sense of the three pillars, right? Skills development, shared financing, and legal mobility of workers. Given where you sit and what you've seen, and I think you've also done a lot of work on diaspora issues, how do you think countries of origin and destination can be compelled to work together? What are the incentives? What are the risks? Your take.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the organizing framework. I think it's highly topical. It's very useful to think about this in the way. It's a global initiative, but I think it's useful to build up to global from the local, national, regional level. So let me give you the perspective from Bangladesh, which is unique in many ways. There are 135 odd countries in the world that have a higher GDP per capita than we do. 95 countries in the world that have a greater landmass than we do, but only 7 countries in the world that have a greater population than we do, only 2 of which have a younger population than we do. So you put it all together, we have some 25, 26-year-old olds in the world's most densely populated country, apart from city-states, looking for gainful employment. It is a national imperative and probably the number one priority, skills and jobs. Luckily for us, when you zoom out and you look at the world at large, there is demand for what we can supply. So if I look at it in a stylistic way, Japan is the flip side, the opposite of Bangladesh. The median age of a Japanese is 49, as is the case with a median German. So the average Japanese could be the parent of the average Bangladeshi. They have a large savings pool. We have a large number of people, energetic, active, trainable, ready to work. So in an ideal world, you would have a merger of these two countries, and then demand would equal supply, and that's it, off we go. In the real world, supply and demand do not match because there is market failure, because what we have is the equivalent of crude oil that needs to be refined. So we're talking about human capital, and clearly there's a huge human dimension to this. But if I just focus on the capital side of things, the analogy is we have a very large pool of crude oil. The people are our critical minerals, but you need to invest in refineries so that you're able to then convert them into investable assets. So with Japan, for example, we now have a structured program of sending skilled workers there. The idea is that we will give you, Japan, or whoever else have the demand, an economic zone. Come and invest in a training facility. You could have your mock-up Japanese hotel and restaurant and train us to become sushi chefs and train us in language, train us in etiquette, but with a guaranteed offtake that at the end of the refinery process, you will be taking delivery of X number of people. So that is the structured way it needs to be done. There's a huge role that technology can play, because to be very honest, at the moment, the way it's done, it is rife with corruption. Everywhere in the world, people transfer, people movement is not clean, is not transparent, it's subject to abuse, easy to exploit. The people involved do not have political agency in a lot of cases, so the more transparency that we can inject into it, the better. But this is really what we need to do, is look at it as a structured investment proposal and go about the human capital development and deployment in that manner.
No, thank you. I think you made a very important point about guaranteed uptake, right? And that means the private sector, right? So all of this cannot happen between government to government without the private sector, because private sector wants the right skills, right people in the right time, in the right place. So Naria, from your vantage point, and Microsoft as a global employer, but also a skilling entity, how can private sector guarantee that uptake? What are your thoughts?
Great question, and thank you so much for hosting. And this is thank you for being here so early, because I know we're the opening session. And just a +1 on Japan. It's the only place I'm still a youth, so it feels great to always be in Japan. So, really great question about the private sector. So, of course, at Microsoft, our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And I think the most important word in that is every. And so I get to work in a part of the company where we're very much thinking about who possibly could be left behind in the digital transformation and now the AI transformation that is happening now. So very wonderful to partner with you at the World Bank, IFATH, and the Solutions for Youth Employment, which is the group steering committee that we're a part of. And this question is really an interesting one, and we try to work especially in partnership with multilateral organizations to really extend the impact of our work. But a couple things that come to mind from the private sector point of view. Our colleagues at LinkedIn are now noting that by 2030, 70% of the skills for every job that exists today will change. 70%. So that means even if the job title stays the same, the skills needed for those jobs will be completely different. So that to me is fearful in some way. That means we all need to upskill and reskill, every single one of us, including in countries that are low and middle income. But it's also a huge opportunity, because it means that 70% of the skills that we need, nobody has them yet. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to really dig in, look at those skills of the future. Those are, of course, going to be in AI, using AI. But more than that, we're seeing that people need resiliency skills, human skills, communication skills. So first of all, this analysis of what are truly the skills. We have access to big data, institutions do, governments do. Can we actually share those across one another? Secondly, we do need to leverage technology to create a system of skills where people can have those learning records and then move them between. So if there's somebody who gets trained in a Japanese hotel that's set up in Bangladesh, a training center, how can they show that they have those skills so they can go to Japan, but maybe there's a new country in the future that they could take those skills to? And third, how do we make sure that we have those signals and those credentials for those certificates, digital certificates for those individuals? So those are, I think, some of the things that we need to put together as a system, and I think the private sector can certainly help on that. Just three things as you were speaking, as both of you were speaking, that came to mind. First of all, I do also think technology develops an opportunity for us to have borderless jobs. So there are also a lot of jobs, right, in technology that somebody can stay in Bangladesh and do that for many different private sector companies. How can we make sure that those are open? How do we make sure we're training in the right way for those? And secondly, I think this is an issue that, every time we have tried to do these in demand countries, we need to keep investing in the demand countries too. Because we know in Japan, there are still a lot of people, in the United States, in Mexico, there are still a lot of people who feel very left behind. And if we're not going to have the investment domestically in those programs, there will always be a lack of political will to have others come and take jobs. So I think we need to all, as a community, think of that. And then finally, what can AI do? Can we build tutors? Can we build agents to help people as they train and skill, help identify and make these matches as well between different industries? So just a few thoughts, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
No, thank you, Naria. I think many of us in the audience may be also thinking, as I'm thinking, that there are different layers of skills, right? You mentioned that there are the low, mid, high-level skills, technical skills with all the AI technology, and very important, I just want to double down on the point that you can't forget the lower end of the income distribution. It has to be inclusive. That said, there's also, and looking at you, Lutfi, there's also this connotation with migration about brain drain, right? Many countries feel this is another, it's not good for them because there's a potential a brain drain element, and that's one of the more controversial aspects of this kind of work. How would Bangladesh, for example, ensure that this doesn't result in brain drain in countries of origin, and any thoughts on that?
Sure, thank you for that. So I think brain drain is a very, very outdated concept. It belongs to a world when the world was very linear. You hop on a plane and you go abroad, and that's the last we see or hear from you forever and ever. I mean, in this day and age of continuous connectivity, I mean, we're getting live streamed right now all over the world. So what my brain does here, if any of it is of value, people back at home can see and benefit from that. So I think the way to look at it is that we do need to harness diaspora as a community. And the host government, the sending country, has a responsibility to do more and do better to harness this community. There is a natural advantage in that members of the diaspora community tend to feel an emotional bond to what they consider to be back home. They're more forgiving. So if we're trying to now improve our investment climate and bring in investors, they could be the first ones. Because if we mess up with them, maybe they'll be a little bit more forgiving. We learn and we improve. They tend to have contacts and networks, communities, talent. They sit at tables that we may not have access to. All of those things we can harness. And I think here again, there is a very important role for technology. If you imagine a LinkedIn for Bangladeshi diaspora, that is the community. Let's slice and dice them by where they reside, what income group they're in, what subject matter expertise they have, what interest they have in contributing to the country. And we really nurture it with proper community management, with proper editorial facilities, proper matchmaking, financial products, diaspora bonds, and ways in which they can contribute directly and feel like they have a stake in there. I think we have not thought about that in such a structured manner. We haven't really looked at diaspora through all the nuances. We have an outdated model of this is manpower export, or that is skilled migration, and their second generation, third generation will never ever be interested to come back, so let's just cut them loose. So we need to reimagine that. We inaugurated an app in New York at the time of the UN General Assembly, designed for Bangladeshi diaspora. We're getting people to sign in now, because for the first time ever, this February, we will be giving the vote to Bangladeshi diaspora. They'll be able to vote in the national elections. It's a big, huge logistical undertaking, but we're very excited about that. But this app needs to work, and we hope that people like Microsoft can help us with that.
That's perfect, because you just asked my next question to Nari about the role of private sector. And I think it's a question to all of you in the audience as to how do we enable private sector to come in and help and work with government. This is not necessarily a space that we see a lot of activity, but we want more. Your thoughts, Nari, and then I'll come to the audience for questions and for an exchange.
Well, that was truly a perfect tee-up. But I think that's one thing about gatherings like this, which I know we did not rehearse it. That's true. But I think gatherings like this and other ways that we can kind of break down the silos between different actors is so helpful. We happened to be a part of a workshop earlier this week with the strategy group here, thinking about jobs and skilling for youth. And there at the table was the bank, of course, were governments, with civil society, private sector. And having those open dialogues about what is truly the incentive and what are my metrics that I need to hit may be very different, are going to be very different from other, government actors and everything. But if we don't have this dialogue and, share exactly what we need to do to be successful, we can't find that common ground. I love that ask, because we would have never known about a wonderful opportunity like this. So I think the more we can gather in different places, learn about one another's perspectives and incentives. And then, of course, at the end of the day, companies like Microsoft, private sector actors, we are looking to serve our shareholders, our customers. Those are going to be, and our employees are our three top audiences and three groups that we are very much thinking about. And so the more that we can get kind of that Venn diagram of incentives for us, for government, for civil society, and we can find that middle ground, I think is the right way for partnership. So, and by the way, I'm a part of the Korean diaspora. I was born in Korea, and my kids are the biggest K-pop fans in the universe. So it's absolutely true that you can really stay connected with your home country.
Thank you for sharing that. But maybe I can do a round of hands up for those of you who think you are diaspora. I mean, I certainly am diaspora, but there you go. I mean, I think there are many of us who fall into that category. Audience, your chance now to ask questions to our panelists or share a reflection or a thought, any suggestions for the World Bank, private sector, governments. I think we have 2 microphones there. Please come and speak to the microphone so our online audience can hear. And please introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, Fat. I'm JC Tharaman. I work with the Afghanistan Social Protection Practice. And the context of global skills partnerships are hugely relevant to us, especially given mobility restrictions in Afghanistan, and we have returning migrants from neighboring countries. So this is extremely timely. Thank you very much. I just wanted to build on your last question, Ifat. You spoke about the private sector. We have government representation. What's the role of the IFC in sort of fostering these partnerships? How can we leverage IFC's private sector expertise? Thank you very much.
Great. I want to look for an IFC colleague in the audience, but if not, we'll come to that question. There's a gentleman here.
Good morning, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity. My name is Adebusuyo Lutayo Olumadewa. I'm the founder of Do the Dream Youth Development Initiative from Nigeria. And I have this question. How does the World Bank plans to ensure that local communities, especially those in fragile and linguistically diverse regions, remain included in the implementation process so that global progress translates into local empowerment and participation? Thank you.
Shall we take one more?
Good morning. I'm Rocio Rena from Rena Consulting. I am also from the diaspora community. I think it was really insightful, and thank you very much for this amazing knowledge cafe. My question is more about implementing these pillars and this strategy. I mean, if you have a suggestion in particular from where to start for sending countries, for receiving countries, and also, okay, if there are industries, if they are private sectors, not only bigger player, but also local small business, that how they can contribute, and in that way they can really cooperate. I mean, I think it's really interesting also to understand, okay, if I want to start, what I can do from where. Thank you.
No, thank you for asking a very practical question. Maybe I come to, please, whichever question you want to take.
Let me make an attempt. I'll take the first and the third one first together, because I think they're related. In terms of IFC, they do a great job of crowding in private investment. It's not as much what money they put on the table, but how they create the table. And my message to them is, think of this skills corridor as an investable vertical. It should be up there, right next to semiconductors and all other industry verticals that they promote in various countries. Because I would like to see that lens, the investment lens, being applied to this area. Whereas otherwise, it is, at the moment, a bit of a hodgepodge. In my country, we have a ministry dedicated to this. We're not fully clear where does the private sector begin and where does the public sector end. As I alluded to earlier, there are allegations of corruption that may or may not be true. We just don't have enough transparency in the whole process. So we need to take, first of all, an investment approach to it, and then an ecosystem approach to it. In the same way that you build a startup ecosystem, I can imagine there being a world where there is a super app on the demand side in Japan and a super app on the supply side in Bangladesh. And then individual startups can plug into that super app on either the demand side or the supply side with some standardized rules of engagement. So, hey, I have 5 plumbers that I can supply. Okay, have they been certified according to certain certification standards? Yes or no? Do they have the language skills? If so, to what level? So you go through that decision tree and you do that entirely through a digital platform to which large and small startups can plug in. So that's the vision.
Thank you. You just gave us a nice framework, which resonates with the way the World Bank is thinking about jobs. It's about investing in the infrastructure, thinking about the policy regulations, and really enabling private sector to come in. So thank you. Brilliant.
No,
Over to you, Nari.
I think that app idea is really very brilliant. And also you could do it at scale too, right? By taking what are the like the sectors in a country that have jobs. What's the value chain and where are all the jobs, and can we match that up? And then maybe there is a way to incentivize and kind of like a fee for performance too that potentially the IFC could think about. Who knows? But I'll address the second question, which is about the localization, which is so important, because of course, at Microsoft, all the programs that we try to put out there, we never do it alone. We'll never be like Microsoft Direct to a local community. It's all about the local partners that are on the ground, that are closest to the work. So we try to be as global as possible, but global when necessary, but as local as possible. And I know that there are so many nonprofit organizations that are acting on the ground, and then so many intermediaries, like all of us too, many of us in the room. How can we make sure that that dollar gets to the nonprofit organization? I think our group thinks a lot about transformation in AI especially. We do believe it will reduce digital debt, that it will increase productivity, but the smallest NGOs, it's going to be the hardest for them to receive those tools. So how can we really make sure that we're working directly? And I do, this is a conundrum. I don't have the answer, but I would love to chat with you after to see how we can make sure to empower at the most local level.
Thank you.
If I could just add, the role of government, particularly if it's a developing country. I'll give you very almost micro level examples from Bangladesh. So you need to be able to make a payment, $500, to a foreign organization that is giving you online language training. In a country with capital controls, you can't do that. So you don't know who to go to. The local bank will not let you make that payment. So you need the central bank to intervene and resolve that, which we had to do. You have incidents of forgeries, certificates that have been clearly tampered and doctored with. And if you don't have a centralized, credible way of verifying that, maybe AI-powered, then that also contaminates it for everybody. So there's a role for government there to also ensure that, particularly if the majority of the local economy is in the informal sector. You do need to bring this into a formal sector and then take it abroad. Visa processes. Certain countries have a structural barrier to attaining visas because the perception or the reality is there's just too many fake documents floating around, and therefore it's too much of a hassle to bother with that country. Let's go somewhere else. So we need to try and equalize that as well and come up with ways in which the right candidates can really signal that they are the right candidates.
Thank you. Any round of questions? I see 2 hands already.
Hello everyone, good morning. Thank you so much for this fantastic knowledge cafe. My name is Rishikesh TMM Iyengar. I work in the social protection global team and Tanzania's social protection team. Given the current environment of anti-immigration sentiments and also the AI disruption that's happening, how do you think we can scale up this fantastic model that we are discussing, right? So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Esiri from the Bureau of Statistics in Nigeria. My question links to what he just said. You know, there's a huge anti-immigration sentiment. So what can, government do to make sure that, I think you touched on it, the host communities are not, we have to invest in them, make sure they're not left behind. So how do we address those concerns so that, when we have these migrants coming, all the cultural differences that they come in, how do we address all those things? I think that's my question. Thank you.
Great. And before there's a third question over there. Please. And then I'll come.
Hi, Anita Thomas. I represent Women First International Fund at the UN and chair the NGO committee on FFD. My question is specific to the Global Accelerator for Jobs and Social Protection. How is the World Bank leveraging that, and what is the role of private sector in this regard, especially in the Pathfinder countries?
Thank you. I think there was a...
Just to add also about the negative perception from the sending country about the people that decide to emigrate to work overseas. So also about that, just to add in the two previous questions.
So just summarizing, the integration issue, the issue of course, the political dynamics these days. Who wants to take a first cut?
So there is a host country issue and then there's a sending country issue. I will leave aside the host country issues and talk about what we can do more. I think we have an obligation to regularize the way we send people a lot more. We have an obligation to make sure that we're not sending people with the incorrect qualifications, forged documents, on false pretenses, telling them that it's skilled jobs, but actually it isn't. There are irregularities on the part of sending countries, and they're for understandable reasons. You have a large population, you can't generate enough jobs at home, you try and send as many as possible. And frankly, my observation is that we have been very lenient on criminals that are involved in this space because, well, they are sending people abroad, so at least they're getting them jobs, and why not? And, once in a while they get caught, people get deported, and then we let them free. There is no consequence at the moment for contaminating this whole space, but actually there is. It ends up devaluing your passport, your people can't get visas elsewhere, so sending countries need to really pull up their socks and take the lead in regularizing this area, and where there are irregularities, be seen to be clamping down on it so that legal, formal, documented migration can thrive.
That's great. And I'll take a perspective from the receiving countries. So I think I kind of touched on this before, but there are a couple of programs that we've worked with civil society organizations where they train home country people as well as receiving country together. And I think some of those models work very well. Those are pilots. They're not scalable. So how do we bring those to scale? But on the macro point, I do think and it's very worrisome to me, as I think it is to many people around in this room, that there is this sentiment, this nationalistic sentiment, anti-immigration, and it's just simply not true, There's a lot in the media right now. I mean, there was a big article, for example, in the New York Times about how college graduates in the U.S. in computer science aren't getting jobs anymore. It's simply not true. I mean, there is absolutely right now a moment of disruption in the labor market, and we do need to really think about that. But in the kind of long run, there's always been trouble for a challenge for early career graduates to get a job. Doesn't matter like what time period. So I think we need to really work as a community to fight this disinformation about X person is taking your job. And again, I think that technology with AI, we have to be very careful because of a lot of the deep fakes and things that can happen, and we need to mitigate against that. But also, how can we leverage technology? How can we leverage different platforms, social media, to actually show the benefit of for receiving countries, because there is true benefit, right, when we can set up these systems and partnerships.
Thank you, Nari. I think, in many ways what Nari is also adding to is the point that knowledge, right? And this is what we are here about. It's about really getting out the objective, analytical, data-driven knowledge on what works, what doesn't work, and why something like a global skills partnership is needed, just because the numbers, the economics is very, very clear for countries in terms of growth, for the globally, just the way you want to make sure that you grow and you have an aging population that is well cared for, that we have a society that we can all be proud of. I think that the writing is on the wall, but you wanted to come in.
I wanted to just say one more thing, which is I think the other thing is that on this question in a receiving country, it is incumbent on the employers, especially the private sector, to speak up on this and to say, actually, we do have talent shortage. This is not about, kind of all the nationalistic fears that could come into play. So that would be a call. And I think something that uniquely the private sector can do to speak up as people who are hiring talent.
Thank you. We are kind of almost close to the end. It's 3 more minutes. I want to sort of actually I think there was a question by a colleague from the UN on the Global Accelerator. For those of you who know, it's really an effort, a collective UN, World Bank, and partner effort to make sure that social protection is there to help people accessing better jobs. I think, thank you for bringing that up. We are very much aligned with that vision, and that speaks to the question that was asked earlier about sort of the informal sector, the lower end of the community in fragile locations. How do you make sure that they have protection to get into this market, but also as workers move, you want to make sure there's portable social protection so that they are able to have jobs with dignity. And the ability to actually invest back and the whole circular migration path that many of you mentioned, including mobilizing the diaspora. So I think that's kind of central to why the work that the UN and colleagues are doing on social protection along with us is so critical. So we're almost to the end. I just want to see if there's a double-hander anywhere before we close. You've been a fantastic audience for a first early morning session. I certainly learned a lot, but I just wanted to make sure that I leave you with some, at least a key message that I took away. Just reminding ourselves of the numbers, but listening to you, Lutfi and Naria, is that talent is universal. But what the numbers tell us, opportunity is not. So the way I look at Global Skills Partnership is as a way to really unlock those opportunities so that talent is well distributed. As an economist, I think of that as fundamental, basic economics, right? But then to do that, again, listening to everyone here and you, we kind of need to get what I call the principles of 3T right, which is you want to make sure that you're tailoring the talent, the skills, the new skills that are needed is there, and that you are, timing it so that the market can actually get it when it needs, because otherwise the private sector is going to sort of say, bye-bye, I'm not being part of it, I'm not getting what I want. And then finally, you need to target the right population, depending on where you have the labor needs. And that gives me to my final point about if we do this right and bringing in the country perspectives at the government level, at the private sector level, at the worker level, we can get to scale because the numbers are tremendous and it's not going to be enough to just have small pilots, but to your point about thinking through the systems and the needs across so we can get to scale. But then it's the second S, which is the systems. It has to be a systematic approach. We have to take a systems approach so that this is done in a way that the big data app or the app you mentioned, a big employer app and a worker app, and how you bring that matching together. That's a pretty a simple way, but a very powerful way to think about systems. And then finally, I think, I want to leave all of you with this thought that it's really about shared responsibility, right? This is really shared because you need to bring that ecosystem of different actors with the worker at the middle of it. And so let's think of it as that, and in your work, in certainly my work, I hope in your work I will really think about how do we share responsibility in making sure that we can make this work. With that, I want to sort of see if there's any final half a minute reflections, and then I think I have to close.
Well, thank you very much for that. So as I started by saying, it's a wonderful organizing framework, and you've brought multiple stakeholders to the table. But rather than leave it as something abstract, I would really like to see us make progress on this in Bangladesh. So let's see if we can work out a mode of arrangement. Microsoft, World Bank, Bangladesh, let's pick a couple of countries.
Love it.
Create a corridor, let's build that ecosystem. Let's do a 100-day sprint and really take it off the ground.
There you go. I hope my
We'll
team is
report back
listening.
next year.
Thank you very much. Let's do that.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, my plant. Sorry, I didn't read the plan.